During 2015 and 2019, the region did experience some improvements, but some threats and risks to our sustained human development also intensified. Despite this difficult situation, some hope was provided by specific improvements in some areas of sustainable development in the years right before the COVID-19 pandemic. These improvements were mainly in terms of infrastructure for generation of renewable energy, access to basic services such as water and sanitation infrastructure. Also, we did observe a reduction in infant mortality, the levels of poverty, as well as a recent fall in homicidal violence rates in most countries of the region. And despite of this good news, and looking at the region as a whole, our main conclusion is that since the arrival of COVID-19, the threats and the risks which endangered human development in our countries have increased. One key point for the region is the population dividend that many countries are currently experiencing. A population dividend happens when a country has a large proportion of young population and young labor force and a smaller proportion of older population. And this means that there is a kind of a surplus or a bigger proportion of population in productive ages. And in this sense, access to education is, of course, a precondition for human development, leading to the generation of employment opportunities as well as income for, or more income opportunities for the population. And all the governments of the countries of our region have promised or have made promises at a international level of substantial improvements in terms of education, and specifically in 2000 with the Millennium Development Goals, and more recently with the Sustainable Development Goals, whose goals we are supposed to meet by 2030. And despite these commitments, this report presents that in the years immediately prior to the pandemic, the regional trends do not point to meeting the subscribed goals, which of course creates new challenges. And specifically in Belize, school enrollment at all levels decreased between 2015 and 2019. And in the region, our education systems were not prepared to transition into a virtual modality, and the pandemic increased the gaps in terms of access to education because of it. And to add a little bit of context, on average in the region, only 13% of the students in vulnerable households have a computer in their homes. And in many cases, they have to share it between several children, which of course create exclusion realities for many of them. And remote education, of course, has been a challenge for most of us, because on one hand, it's a way of reducing risks of a contagious virus like COVID, but on the other side, the use of internet still has many barriers that can potentially affect the education process of many children and have very regressive effects, because they affect to a greater extent people who were already on a very vulnerable situation.